So today I'm going to share with you my 9 favorite tips for growing radishes, and we're going to go through these sequentially starting from seed all the way through to harvesting, so that by the end of this video you know exactly how to go about growing amazing and beautiful radishes in your garden this season. And so to get started with tip number 1 is to prep the soil, and it's super easy on this front. All that you need to do is add 1 inch of compost onto the top of the soil in the area that you're planning on planting those radishes. And then once you've got that compost down, simply spread it so it's in a nice and even layer. And the reason why we're doing this is that it's going to add both nutrients and microbial life into the soil, which is going to help the radishes grow nice and big and strong and really healthy during their time. And so with the soil prep, the second tip is to make 9 divots per square foot. And so for myself, I'm utilizing my spacing tile, which is going to have them all perfectly spaced out. If you don't have one of these on hand, then you can eyeball it and put about 3 inches between each of the divots. And you want to make each of these divots about 1 centimeter or a ½ inch deep, because that's where we're going to be putting our seeds into. Speaking of, tip number 3 is to place 3 seeds into each of the divots. And so all that you need to do here is drop 3 seeds into the divot and then move on to the next divot until each of them have 3 seeds in it. And the reason why we add 3 seeds is to ensure that at least one of them germinates and begins to grow. But specifically for radishes, there's another reason to this, which we're going to touch on a little bit later on in this video. So that then brings us into tip number 4, and that is to cover them with 1 centimeter of worm castings. And the reason why we do this is because for a seed to germinate and begin to grow, it needs to be in a consistently moist environment. And worm castings do an amazing job at retaining moisture, which is going to make it easier to maintain that consistently moist environment and then ultimately result in a higher number of them germinating and beginning to grow. And speaking of that, tip number 5 is to ensure consistent moisture, and specifically around the first 5 to 7 days. So over these first 5 to 7 days, you want to be checking the soil on a daily basis, and you can do this by simply placing the back of your hand on the soil where you planted those radish seeds. If it's still moist to the touch, it doesn't need more water. However, if it is dry to the touch, you want to give it a nice big drink of water to ensure that that top 1 inch of soil is nice and moist, so that the seeds have the highest probability of germinating. And this does mean that if you're trying to start these seeds during a heat wave or during a really sunny stretch, then you're going to end up wanting to water at least 2 to 3 times per day, because that top inch can also dry out really quickly. Now, tip number 6 is a really important one, and a pretty cool one when it comes to radishes. But just before we touch on that, if you have not subscribed to the channel yet here, I really encourage you to do so. We put out new videos just like this one every single week, as well as tons of experiments to take as much of the guesswork out of gardening as possible, so you can be spending all of your time just getting your hands dirty and enjoying all of the wonderful times in the garden. So with that said, tip number 6 here is to not thin your radishes. And so remember, we planted 3 of them into those holes, and so if 2 or 3 of them germinate and begin to grow in that one little divot, we don't want to thin those out. Allow them just to grow as is. And the reason for this is because as they mature and begin to root up, they're actually going to push one another away rather than choking or strangling one another. And as a result, tripling your harvest per square foot that you planted. And so as we start getting into the home stretch here, tip number 7 is to start a succession crop. So one of the beautiful things about radishes is that they're such a fast crop. They're ready to be harvested in 30 to 40 days. But what that means is that you can very quickly and easily plant another crop right beside it. And so all that you do is basically repeat steps 1 through 6 around 14 to 21 days after you started the initial set of seeds. So now you're going to have 1 set of seeds that are getting to maturity and being ready to harvest, while the second set is just getting started and beginning to grow. And then you can harvest the initial set and then start another set in that area, and the second crop is now going to be reaching maturity. This method of succession planting is going to ensure that you don't have radishes just once, but rather you have a steady supply of them all through the summer months. And so tip number 8, our second last one, is to harvest them early. You want to harvest radishes as they begin to head up, and you don't want to leave them in the ground for too long to allow them to grow really big. The bigger that they get, the tougher they become and the woodier that they become, so they're not nearly as enjoyable to be eating when they hit that stage. So you're best off to be harvesting them on the slightly earlier side, because again, your succession crop is going to be ready in just a few weeks time, and that's where you can be having perfectly ripe radishes with that beautiful texture to them without them being woody for weeks and weeks on end with your succession crop. So the 9th and last tip here to get you started is when do you start radishes? And on this front, my encouragement to you is to start some right now. Whether it is early in the season, middle of the season, late in the season, go ahead and get some radishes started. And the reason why you can do this with radishes is because they're really hardy, so they can germinate in cool temperatures and they grow really fast. So if you're watching this video and it's early in the season, you can get them started because they're nice and hardy. If it's middle of season, easy peasy. And if it's late in the season, you can still get some started because they're going to be ready in about 30 to 40 days. Folks, if you follow those 9 tips here, going from seed all the way through to harvest, I guarantee that you're gonna have beautiful radishes coming out of your garden at multiple times throughout the season here. If you have any questions on this, go ahead and share those down in the comments. If you've got any tips, leave those down in the comments as well, because I'd love to learn from you. Other than that, I can't wait to catch you on the next video. Go get your hands dirty, and I'll see you soon.